Broadcasting from the Symphony Studios in Marietta, Georgia, it's time for the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. Tune in every week as we spotlight the very best minds in our industry. Now here are your hosts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the 17th episode of the Technology Harmony Podcast, brought to you by Symphony Technology Solutions. I'm one of your hosts, Katie Galley, and today I am lucky enough to be joined by my co-host, one of our project managers here, Shannon Tabor. How are you doing, Shannon?
Good. Thanks for having me, Katie.
Of course, I'm really excited because this is our first time co-hosting an episode together, so I can't wait to dive in. How about you?
I know. I'm excited. It's going to be fun.
Yes, I'm really excited, and it's made even better because in the Symphony studio with us today as our guest, we have Supervisor and Assistant Fire Marshal with the Nashville Fire Department, Joe Almon. How are you doing, Joe?
Hi, Katie. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. Thank you so much for stopping by our studio and sharing your story with us today.
My pleasure.
Well, Joe, we're really excited to dive in and to kick it off to get to know your background a little bit. Can you share with us a little bit about your professional journey and how you got the job that you have today?
Sure. I've been in the fire service since 1991. Came into the service as a volunteer, served in many different roles from firefighter through company officer through training officer. And about 6 or 7 years ago, made the transition into investigations and fire prevention side of things. And as we continue to progress, got involved with the plans review side of it on the fire prevention, and approximately a year ago was promoted to the supervisor position over the plan review.
Wow. And so initially, what made you want to get into being, as an assistant fire marshal, just with working with the fire department?
Well, coming from the suppression side of it, you get to recognizing that the codes and the understanding the why behind the things what the codes require, and basically it all comes down to the safety and protection of the people, and not only that, to the firefighters that are in the field.
Yeah, and
That's a great look at that.
Yeah,
that's a great look.
Yeah, and so. Joe, could you dive into a little bit more about what exactly fire marshals do and what your primary roles and responsibilities are?
With the fire marshal's office and the fire prevention division here at Nashville Fire Department, our roles encompass many different things, from the field inspectors that are doing the final inspections to the community risk reduction section that's performing public education. It's even when the first project starts, before it even gets off the ground, we're the ones that are involved on the front end of it, on the plan review side, looking at these architectural drawings, looking at these site plans to make sure that they meet the adopted codes, or what routes can we take to make this project meet our adopted codes. So on the plan review side, we tend to head off a lot of potential issues before it gets to the construction phase.
And so with that, what are some of those issues or some of those things that you try and get ahead of before the construction even begins?
Primarily focused on the same thing, life safety issues and site access issues. We also do have, we help take part in verifying that we have adequate water flow to meet the fire suppression demands, to support the sprinkler systems, that we're able to make access to the building, that the egress is correct, all the fire ratings that are proposed are appropriate for what needs to be with the building.
Gotcha.
For the most part, do you have a lot of construction and general contractors coming to you and automatically adhering to the codes that you have in play, or is that something that they try to buck the system a little bit to cut corners or anything along that line?
Generally, I believe most of them are acting in good faith and are trying to comply with the code. Here in Nashville, we've got one of the largest. We're going through such a building boom right now in the whole Middle Tennessee area that we've got a lot of persons coming in from out of town that may not be familiar with the processes, the way they work in Nashville, And that's a small part of what we do, is also help them understand and get through the processes of what we're looking at. But overall, I believe most people are wanting to comply with the codes, but just from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, there's slight variations, interpretations of what can be acceptable. So that's kind of where we try to come in on the front end of it, to head off individually with that.
Right.
That makes sense.
And so, Joe, then, so I think something we've at Symphony we've been learning about, or I've been learning about, is the emergency responder radio system. So, kind of bridging the gap of education around that. So, the importance of getting on the front end, like you're saying, before construction begins. So, can you jump into a little bit what that means and the significance of this system?
Absolutely. The emergency responder radio communication systems actually came out as a result of lessons learned from 9/11 and the inability of the firefighters in the building to have effective communications. In the past, the firefighter's phone jacks in the lobbies or the stairwells have been kind of the norm. But as technology advanced and we got to actually examining the practices of the firefighters, it was the majority were found they've never used one. Had never used a firefighter phone jacks, or very rarely used one, or were not familiar with how to operate them. But yet the two-way radio was something they used every day, every call that they went out on. And the other thing with the phone jacks is they're never in the position where you need them, to be the most effective. So at least with the portable radio coverage, they're able to take the radio with them to where they're at. So if something occurs and they need assistance, they have that lifeline that they can get out of immediately. But as building construction has evolved, the energy efficient buildings, the larger high-rise buildings, and just about any building now, they're all required to meet the responder radio coverage requirements. They're listed in both the IFC and the NFPA. With these requirements, they're critical for mainly the safety of our firefighters and to make sure they have effective and efficient communications inside those buildings. And these systems, it's in Nashville area, they've really become more of an issue in the past 4 to 5 years as the building boom has continued, and we're getting larger and more densely concentrated buildings.
We've done a couple projects in Nashville that I've reached out to Joe on beforehand to gather the information, and it's very refreshing to see that one, Joe was very forthcoming with the answers. He knew what we were talking about. Oftentimes when in some of the locations we get, maybe they're just starting to build out the prerequisites for the system and they're not really sure. So sometimes, they don't really know where to go. But when I reached out to Joe on, we have a couple projects, I said ES1 908, that kind of thing. He was very forthcoming with, nope, this is what the code says. This is where you can find it. This is the permit that you need to get. And instead of going to 5 different people to get the information, he kind of had all the answers for me all at once, which saved me a lot of time, which was very appreciated.
Yeah. And so then with that, is there, Joe, like you said, with the boom, with buildings and they're more densely built, so is there any pushback that you're getting from people building these, putting in the emergency responder systems, or just any more education and bridging that gap? Is it more challenging?
There's still some pushback, mainly just due to the associated costs with the system. A lot of people have not factored in that on the front end of their budget. So suddenly to have to absorb that much of a hit somewhere down the road, it can be a little daunting. But we've tried to reach out and educate the builders, developers, and other interested parties into exactly what we're looking for and why these systems are so important. And will continue to be more so in the future. Mm-hmm. Typically most people would think of a high-rise building or something like that as one that would probably need one. But I'd say the largest emerging area that we're seeing have to be required in is the mid-rise range, such as 4 to 5 story hotels and buildings. And a lot of it's just due to the density that's around it. The taller buildings that are around it block the signal reception going into these buildings. And we've tried to educate and convince the developers and everyone else that even if you do your testing at this time and it does not show that you need an enhancement system, to go ahead and incorporate the backbone of it into your construction. That way, somewhere down the road, or if something changes beforehand that does now require a system, you at least already got that in place. So you plug in the new head end, the antennas, and with minimal disruption.
Which is a great take on that. I know with construction booming and the buildings going up, it's going to hinder signal to some of the smaller buildings that don't have that backbone. So it's very important to get that backbone in, because at some point you will need an emergency responder system. I completely agree with that. That's very important.
And that's exactly our experience has been. And, and like I said, it's typically, you think of the larger buildings, shopping malls or high-rise buildings as being the primary ones that need to incorporate this on the front end. But, like I said, the smaller buildings now, we're starting to see a good number of those that are requiring them as well.
Trying to bridge that gap on the education, is it really, how are you going about that? How are you trying to show them, show these developers that you really do need to get in on the front end of this rather than waiting till the last minute or waiting till you actually need it? What is the benefit? And how do you go about educating people on that?
Question.
Generally, we try to, anyone that want to propose a large development or a pretty substantial project, we try to bring them in beforehand for a what we call a pre-submittal meeting, which involves not just us, but also the Building Codes Department, Public Works, the Water Services. Quite a few of the other city agencies are involved, so we can all discuss the needs or potential issues on the front end that they may need to incorporate into their design phase. Some of these conversations take place 18, 24 months before we see the first real plans.
Wow.
For a project. So it's a long, continuous process. But if we can get it to them on the front end, it makes it a lot easier as they get closer and closer to the project. Gets more to a substantial design phase. That these systems, they usually have already performed some type of testing or have some type of idea that they'll need the system by then.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Are you seeing the trend starting to go towards early on getting there on the forefront, or are you still seeing the trend where, oh man, I can't get a CO until I have my emergency responder system in?
We're tending to see more of it on the front end now.
Wonderful.
In the past, it has been a little more retroactive, which leads a lot of people to a scramble to try to get the stuff, try to comply to get the CO. But in that situation where that does occur, we will try to work with them and give them, a timeline to be able to implement the system so that, it's not right here, you've got to have it. We may give them 6 months, 12 months, some kind of reasonable timeline to get those in.
Which is good, because a lot of jurisdictions don't even give them that.
Right.
So that's wonderful that you're willing to work with them, for sure.
Yeah, and part of that, we recognize that you can't plan for every contingency on the front end. And we realize that, there are going to be situations where we have to give a little and they have to give a little, but in the end, we still have to meet the requirements.
Right.
Well, it's clear then, Joe, and Shannon too, getting in on the front end of this, but then I think it seems as if the big gap could be in that educational component. So it's, while those high rises and those larger buildings, that is becoming more of the norm. Like you said, more of the mid-rise, the smaller buildings too, that you need to implement the ERCs much earlier rather than later.
Correct. Yeah. And any developer or builder, anybody that's, if you have any question, it's relatively inexpensive to have the RF analysis done. Even a little bit of money on the front end can save you a whole lot of money towards the end of your project. And then,
yeah. Hey, Joe, let me ask you a question. With with some of the smaller builds, like the stick builds and some of the smaller ones, the 2-story builds, that kind of stuff, do you see a lot of general contractors trying to get creative with their layout for the antennas, for the coverage, or is it just like one of those like one antenna per floor or whatever meets the propagation type thing, or do you have people coming to you trying to be creative with it?
Generally, once they get the system survey back, a lot of the RF heat maps will give them the locations of where they anticipate the coverage is going to be needed. Most people have been pretty compliant about providing the coverage where it's needed at. We've had some that have come through that were showing just maybe 1 or 2 floors and a small area around the core of the building that may need coverage. So with those, they've been able to do it with a fairly small system, where they may have 1 or 2 antennas per floor, and then the rest of the building was within acceptable levels. But there are others. A lot of the buildings here, what we're doing here now, are incorporating underground parking with them, or lots of heavy steel, concrete construction, and those areas as well. They have to be covered.
What's the number one thing that you're constantly seeing that general contractors or customers or builders are continuously missing on the front end? Like, what's the one thing that they're not getting or that they overlook?
As far as the responder radio systems, I think it's mainly that the requirement is relatively new. I believe it was first incorporated in the IFC in 2012. So, that, and at the moment, that is currently still the edition that Nashville is operating under. We anticipated moving to a new code, but with the COVID changes and several other factors,
things
keeps pushed back a little bit. But we do plan on moving to an updated code edition, probably the 2018 NFPA standards, which do a better job of incorporating and spelling out the requirements for the systems in them. That section IFC 510, and it's expanded a great deal. And even on the NFPA side, that section has been broken out of NFPA 72 and placed into its own standard now.
Right.
So the code organizations are recognizing the importance of these systems as well.
Gotcha.
And so Joe, too, I mean, you said with COVID, everything going on in the world right now, you anticipate then updating of the code. So do you already see anything that might be needed to be put in buildings because of what has been happening in the world right now?
That's a great
The COVID challenges, they're changing every day. And I think every jurisdiction, every place has a little bit different take on exactly what they need to do. Somewhere down the road, I think some of this will have to be incorporated into codes. The places that we've consulted with, we've been tried to be pretty flexible and understanding with it, because this is an unprecedented thing. It's not like anything we've ever faced before. So we're trying to catch up with this as we go along.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. You don't know what you don't know. I mean, it's just, I guess, things coming and seeing what happens, taking it in stride.
So new, and it's just changing the world. But thanks to you and yours for being the first responders throughout the COVID, while all of us are, working remotely and stuff, you guys are still on the forefront, and we appreciate your time and your dedication for sure.
Great. Yeah, since this has started, fortunately on the plan review side, we have the flexibility to have my staff work remote part of the time. So we've been able to limit, we've taken measures to limit the number of people that are entering the building, the number of in-person meetings that we're conducting. But also that ability to be able to have our staff work remote when they need to has been a great benefit to not only to the department as a whole to be able to continue our operations, but there's a kind of a peace of mind to our employees as well.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. If somebody wanted to learn more about you, learn more about the Nashville Fire Department, where might they do that?
Sure. They can visit www.nashville.gov and search for the fire department. Within there, you'll find links that will have information about not only the fire marshal's office, but all of our other various sections as well. And also in there will be a list of contacts that will have links to our emails and phone numbers.
Thank you all for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. To learn more about our guest and their company, check out the show notes for the relevant links. If you would like to learn more about us here at Symphony, of course, subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube channel. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook at Symphony Technology Solutions and on Instagram at Symphony Tech Solutions. Here at Symphony, our ultimate goal is to make harmonious music out of all the technological noise. And we hope today's episode helped in doing just that. See you next time.